All right, continue to watch live shots out of Tallahassee right now, where they're having these student rallies. A lot of the students directly affected from those in that Florida school that was hit by that attack, as well as other sympathetic students across the state gathering in Tallahassee, demanding gun control right now. The Florida Republican State Representative Matt Caldwell, who's also calling for changes. Whether they suit some of the students who are doing the protesting, I don't know. He's here right now. Sir, thank you for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on, Neil.
What have you had a chance to tell those students, to tell those concerned about this and not wanting to see it again? What are administrators like yourself, politicians and leaders offering them?
Yeah, no, listen, and it's not really about me telling them anything. I'm listening to them. They came by our office here about an hour ago, and I gave them about 20 minutes just to tell me exactly what their experiences were. And we're talking about some of the kids that saw their own friends honestly die right in front of them. It's a horrible tragedy, and I wanted to hear what their thoughts were the things they wanted to work on. Ultimately, we're going to have to figure out what it is that's going to make a difference. I think what's going to make a difference is treating this for what it is. It's a lone wolf terrorist attack. These are individuals, maniacs, that they plot, they plan, they practice. We need to be able to take them as seriously as we do radical religious terrorists or radical civil terrorists, people who lay out a plan in the long term and decide to carry out an attack on the people at our schools, in our churches, and places where, unfortunately, we've designated gun-free zones so no one's able to fight back. I think
Were
a lot
they satisfied
of those
with that,
issues
Representative? In other words, was that enough? Because a lot of them, at least who I've heard, want a lot more than that. They recognize that, the nature of the crazy shooter issue, but their problem seems to be guns again and again. Too many out there, too many of the wrong people getting their hands on them.
Yeah, they're focused on that, and we absolutely want to pursue ways to keep the wrong people from getting guns, and that's all I'm going to have as my position. What is actually going to be effective? I think the worst outcome we could have is to pass some kind of blanket gun ban like was proposed yesterday or tried to pull out of committee yesterday, and then that not actually solve anything, not make any difference. And then how do you go look in the next parent's eyes and say, well, this didn't solve it, well, let's try something else that really won't have any impact on the situation. You have to have law enforcement willing and able to communicate with each other. Clearly in this instance, the FBI knew something about him, the local police knew something about him, the school district knew something about him. They weren't talking to each other. They weren't able to identify that he was a threat in time. And that's the kind of things we're talking about, identifying lone wolf terrorists, which is what these folks fit in. They aren't religious terrorists. They aren't civic terrorists. They're looking for fame in some kind of twisted way. But again, our methods have to really match what the madness is here with people who are intent to harm in order to create an event. We're going to talk about some of the proposals out there. We've heard people talk about changing the age to buy certain guns, and certainly the legislature is the one that should speak to what's the age that you can do things, whether we're talking about buying tobacco or alcohol. Guns just the same. I absolutely should have that conversation and making sure that our background checks.
Is the legislature open to that? Would they entertain that? In Florida, you have to be older than 18 to get one of these weapons.
I certainly want to talk about it and figure out how did that change anything. Into all this, we've got to look at the experiences people have had. You go back to Sandy Hook, and that wouldn't have had any bearing. He killed his mother, stole all her guns. In that instance, we absolutely needed to know who he was and what he planned to do, and whether or not you're able to buy a gun at a certain age wouldn't affect that outcome or that circumstance. So it's not any one solution. All that I want to make sure that we recognize is that our Second Amendment rights are the same as our First Amendment rights. They were written by people who had to fight a rebellion, overthrow a king. They wanted to guarantee that they would be able to defend themselves in the future. They'd be able to speak freely in the future. And any changes we talk about having when it comes to self-defense, we have to look and say, look, would we entertain this in the same way as it affected the First Amendment? The founders looked at them as equally important. That's why they're both sid by side there in the Bill of Rights.
But do you think our founders had any idea about semi-automatic weapons or about people, who would have access to that who shouldn't?
No, but they had no idea about the internet or cable news. Anybody would accept the federal government coming in and trying to censor what you're able to say or not say in either of those media. So look, that's why they're parallels. We absolutely need to make sure that people who are mentally unstable aren't buying guns, people who intend to harm us, and again, whether that's because of religious fanaticism, whether that's because they want to bring down the government, or whether it's because they just want to, for whatever reason, think they'll be famous by attacking their friends and their family in these situations. That's what we have to address.
Sir, thank you very much for taking the time. Matt Caldwell, the Florida State Representative.
Absolutely.